Mr. Kevin Kraft, Acting Director of the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives and Administrative Director of the Maryland Governor's Commission on African and Middle Eastern American Affairs, has lived around the world in the past 20 years in Maryland. We are honored to have Mr. Kraft introduce our symposium.
Thank you, Betty. Good evening, everyone, and I hope this is all working. We did a nice practice session and everything was working well, but welcome to World Artist Experiences Fall Virtual Symposium. Again, my name is Kevin Kraft, and I'm with Governor Hogan's Office of Community Initiatives. Tonight, and over the next 2 weeks, we will continue WAE tradition of bringing informal, unique, and informative presentations from all around the world. I've been fortunate to watch and host a number of WAE events, and I often get the E wrong because I've always been thoroughly entertained. I expect that this evening's program will be no exception, as we explore culture is people telling our stories into the future. While thinking about how storytelling has affected my life, nothing was really coming to mind at first. I am an Air Force brat, and I was born in Okinawa, Japan. I had never lived anywhere longer than 3 years, other than South Jersey, where I went to high school, and my folks actually retired. I eventually joined the Air Force myself and spent 9 years at 5 different bases and working in over a dozen different countries in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. My last duty station was in Maryland in 1991, and with the exception of a 6-year stint in the Atlanta area, thanks to the economy way back when, but I have been here ever since. When people ask me where I'm from, I always say I'm a citizen of the world, because really that's how I felt about it. However, when I thought about it in the context of storytelling, I realized something. Despite all the traveling around the world, I'm really a lifelong Marylander. Why, you might ask? My mother was actually born in Baltimore, and my parents met there. In between assignments, we always made a stop in Baltimore to visit my mother's family. And my actual first trip to Baltimore, I was a baby. I was 3 months old. We'd just come back from Okinawa. But if somebody mentions cold beer, I think of Chuck Thompson, the O's, and Natty Boh. I know about Mayflower moving and their effect on the Colts. I know about Dunbar High and Duckpin Bowling. Baltimore is in me, and I've never lived in the city. This is just a small sample of the power of storytelling. So sit back, relax, and be entertained. Thank you. I think you're still muted, Betty.
Betty, you're muted.
World Artist Experiences' vision is to bridge people and cultures across the world for dialogue, using the arts as an international language. For over 20 years, the organization has brought people together to share, to observe one another, to listen to one another, to build friendships and develop trust, respect, steps toward peace in our fragile world. This symposium for the next 3 weeks will do just this. Just one note for the evening, there's a technical detail. Please post any questions and answers in the Q&A box. With great pleasure, I introduce tonight's moderator, Dr. Greg Fowler, Associate Dean of the College of Fine Arts and Professor of Electronic Media and Film at Towson University. Previously, Dr. Fowler served as an essayist and associate editor of the International Dictionary of Films and Filmmakers and the Journal of Film and he's published in numerous professional journals. Currently, he is editing a documentary of the story of a 20th century art dealer and French resistance fighter. Dr. Fowler generously shares his talents with us on the Symposium team. We are honored to have Dr. Fowler be the moderator for tonight's session. Dr. Fowler.
Thank you, Betty, for that wonderful introduction. I greatly appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. I'm here to help moderate our guests for the evening, and I'm going to get right to it. We're very honored and happy to have Kiran Sarah with us for our first speaker. He is the president of the International Storytelling Center, a cultural institution dedicated to enriching lives around the world through storytelling. And he hosts their premier storytelling event each year, the National Storytelling Festival. So I'm going to turn it right over to Kiran. He's going to speak for a bit, and then we'll have a couple of minutes of questions and answers after he's finished before we move to our next two guests. So Kiran, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. It's wonderful to be here. And I love that introduction. Thank you so much, Greg and Betty and Kevin. Kevin, when he talked about being a world citizen, it's something I really love. And it's hence why I'd like to offer my introduction now. Good evening, but also namaste y'all, because I'm living in Appalachia. And I like to combine my traditions and my heritage and offer you all a namaste y'all from Jonesboro, Tennessee. So I want to begin actually with asking you all to close your eyes. And I want you to picture your childhood home and imagine what pops into your head first. Perhaps it's a memory so thick and vivid that you remember every detail of it, every image, every smell, as clearly as it happened yesterday. You can open your eyes. For me, it's my mother's voice. To me, my mom was a divine feminine goddess, a lion, confident and strong. So I'm about 10 years old and I'm getting ready to go to school, and I hear my mom lean out the front door of our concrete house in South England and call out in her loud, proud voice, "Tea's ready, boys." I come downstairs to find 10 burly men in our kitchen, sipping on good English tea in my mother's best cups and digging into a beautiful array of British biscuits. They're the neighborhood dustbin men, or the garbage men, and there's so many of them that they spill out into the garden. Their trucks are parked 4 deep out on the cul-de-sac street of Chaffage Road, and they're laughing with my mother, telling stories, connecting. And I'm guessing as they collected rubbish in our neighborhood, this was their favorite stop, morning tea time at the Sirrah household. Now, why is this memory so fixed in my mind? Partially because it's an unforgettable image, but also because it happens so often. In the Sikh tradition, which emphasizes serving others, we consider sitting down to share a meal with someone one of the highest forms of prayer. To my mom, it was an expression of who she was. But mostly it sticks with me because of what it taught me. What my mother was showing, inviting the dustbin men into our home and sharing a meal on our best plates and cups, was that she valued and respected their dignity. From a tiny kitchen in a concrete housing estate on a dead-end street in a small town in South England, she was doing her part to build a fairer world, to dismantle historical inequality. She was taking aim at the oppressive systems and cultural violence towards communities that had been marginalized for thousands of years, all by serving tea to a bunch of strangers, telling stories, and providing a safe space for them to tell theirs. Now, I want you to close your eyes again. Imagine checking your phone right now and finding out that the leader of your country has decreed that you have 3 months to leave. If you don't, you will be killed. He doesn't care where you go, just not here. And the place that you end up, it will be a different season. You will look different from the people currently living there. You may not even be welcomed. You're thinking, what do I take? Where do I start? You may be weighing various possessions right now. You're thinking, oh, my photo album, or my mother's ring, of course, or the chipped coffee cup that my grandfather drank out of every day, my laptop. Maybe you're thinking about all the things that you love that you have to say goodbye to because you can't load them onto your arms, or onto your back. You can open your eyes. That's the dilemma that my parents faced in the summer of 1972, when they were living in Uganda, their home at the time, and the country's dictator, Idi Amin, declared that all Ugandan Asians would be forced out or executed in 3 months. It's 50,000 people. Some fled to Kenya, others to Canada or India. But my parents, Sikhs of Indian heritage, went to the United Kingdom. What little they lugged with them was stolen by robbers en route to the airport. And when they arrived in a small English town called Eastbourne, it was in the middle of a winter. They didn't even have the right clothes on them. It was also in the midst of a terrible anti-immigrant wave in England, and a lot of people hated them on sight. That home that I described to you, that little English cul-de-sac where my mother welcomed in strangers for tea, that was where my parents ended up. Now I want you to consider for a moment how much you carry in your head, because the human brain consists of about 100 billion neurons, and each neuron forms about 1,000 connections to other neurons. They keep combining so that each neuron helps with multiple memories at a time, which exponentially increases the brain's memory storage, its capacity to something like 1 million gigabytes. And according to Paul Reber, who's a professor at psychology at Northwestern University, if your brain worked like a DVR, it would have enough bandwidth to hold 3 million hours of TV shows. That's like 300 years of TV worth binging on Netflix. Now look around the Zoom or look around the space. Everyone around you has stories, memories, millions of moments from their lives that make up who they are and what they believe, where they've been, and also where they want to go. It's not just that the anecdotes like, oh yeah, one time when I was 11, the funniest thing happened. It's the lore that gets passed down from parents and grandparents, the idiosyncrasies, the histories, the recipes, the music. It's your DNA. These are the gifts that you will pass on to those that will come after you. It's what binds you to the past. A story has the potential to hold time and stop time. And if we're willing to listen, it's what binds us to each other. My storyteller friend from Alabama, Miss Dolores Hydock, and she would call the act of telling people your stories greasing the pan, which is a very important ritual, especially here in the US South, to get to know someone before going too deep. When I asked my father years later, what was it like to be expelled from his home at gunpoint and stuffed through a border into a country in the midst of an anti-immigrant backlash fomented by its government, and enforced onto the streets by skinhead thugs wearing green bomber jackets, DM boots with white laces, he said something I didn't expect. I expected something about the terror that he and my mother felt, the challenges and the uncertainty of it all. And his response, no, son, it was fun. Me and your mum were young. We were 21 years old. We had nothing to lose, and we were doing it all together as one family. We made new friends. Those were the good days. Now, granted, my dad is a glass half full kind of guy. Yeah, Idi Amin, he wasn't that bad. But the point is, my parents didn't need material things to connect with new people and have new experiences, or to remember the old ones. They had everything they needed in each other and in their own heads, and their openness to new experiences. It probably comes as no surprise that my parents stood out in their new home. My dad showed off me the town's newspaper that he saved, one of his first new possessions from 1972. And the front page headline of our local Eastbourne Herald read, Eastbourne receives Ugandan refugees. My father wore a bright red turban and a colourful African shirt, and my mother even brighter red sari. My dad loves to tell a story about a kid who saw them and yelled, look, Mum, aliens. And he didn't mean immigrants, he meant aliens from outer space. My dad loves that, and he still tells that story. But most people in town were good to my family, and their story became my story. I grew up in Eastbourne, which is right on the coast, as the crow flies 50 miles south of London. You could see France on a clear day, and I spent a lot of time on the beach. I'd hang out with my friends underneath the pier or go for walks around the rocky pools, eat fish and chips and pickled eggs, covered in malt vinegar and salt, wrapped in paper. The fat, soggy chips kept your lap warm, and anything left over I'd throw to the seagulls. I remember walking down the street near my house one day and throwing a stone at a wasp nest and getting stung on my big toe. In a lot of ways, I was a typical kid. But I was also the first person with dark skin to be born in my town. We were brown in a white community, and that wasn't always easy. I have 26 stitches on this face. I've been beaten up so many times I've lost count. A neo-Nazi knocked me from my BMX bike when I was just 5 years old. And I've had my head stomped on and woke up in hospital on various occasions. The racism was always there, and I was always on guard. For me, there was a wasp nest on every other corner, but I accepted that as a way of life. What was harder for me to deal with was feeling like an outsider in my own country. When I was called a smelly immigrant or a Paki, I felt like a visitor, not a native. When someone would shout out, "Go back to where you came from," I thought, where is that? I was born in England. I knew of no other place. And I hated that feeling of always being the one and only person that stood out. I had to either figure out a way to answer back, ignore it, shrug it off, or find a way to maneuver through these conversations. We'll get back to that. But first, go back to where you came from. I want to focus on those words for just a moment. When I was 6, I visited India for the first time. It was an incredible experience, and I remember the sights and sounds of organized chaos, a cacophony of beeps and horns and Vespa scooters, and Royal Enfield bullet motorcycles. The shops, the rickshaws, the markets, the streets on carts or wheels, the thin crispy puri with chickpeas, potatoes, and various chutneys and hot sauces, and Barney juice made from tamarind would explode in your mouth. The chai stands on every corner serving hot milky tea. I remember every detail. Once the hottest tea had been poured from the ladle by the chaiwala into tall glasses, everyone, men in suits, children in school uniforms, teenagers in matching college attire, and women in salwar kameez, they all drank the same way, holding the glass with a thumb and little finger. My mother took me to one of the original villages in the lush green fields of Punjab in northern India. There were no rules and no curfew. And what would seem like the whole village would hang out in one house with multiple activities going on. Some sat on the cushions on the floor and watched a 6-hour Bollywood movie. The kids played up on the veranda. Older women would lead in folk songs and stories while keeping the beat from the dolki drum, or someone else tapped on the body of the drum with a metal spoon. It was more about just being there and sharing space than watching the movie. And while we were in India, my mother took me to one of the most famous langars in the world, the Golden Temple. Sikh temples, they're built around the langar, which is basically a community kitchen that offers free meals to anyone and to all visitors, no exceptions. And the Golden Temple is like the world's largest soup kitchen, serving handmade vegetarian meals to around 50,000 people a day. We all sat on the floor with everyone, rich, poor, men, women, straight people, trans people, all religions and colors and abilities, serving one another, sharing a meal as equals. I never forgot that, especially in India, where the caste system sees entire swaths of people as untouchables, not even worthy to eat food with. Eating at the Golden Temple didn't just feel good, it was a political act that broke down the caste system one meal at a time. And back in England, my mother turned our home into a mini langar. One time when she was called for jury service, I came home from school to find the whole jury team hanging out in our living room, drinking tea. She embodied the Sikh philosophy of Nirbhor, Nirvair, which translates into no fear, no hate. Another time she made me clean the hundreds of pairs of shoes of congregants that had been left outside a Sikh temple in London. A lesson of teaching me to never be ashamed to do the work of service to others. What my parents did in Eastbourne and the way people responded became a blueprint for my life. They brought their culture and their stories with them proudly, despite their differences. They kept an open heart and an open door to their neighbors, even when that kindness was not always returned. They talked and they listened, they communicated, they tried to understand. Where are you from? A fairly simple question, right? People ask it all the time. And for most of us, when someone asks you where you're from, you have an answer. But we're all from more than the town that we grew up in. Where did I come from? England, yes, but also the villages of Punjab, the boats in Mumbai upon which my grandfathers left India in the 1940s, bound for East Africa. I come from the railroads that they built across the deserts, from the coastal city of Mombasa, Kenya, to Jinja, the small town and the source of the River Nile in Uganda. I come from the well that my grandfather dug with his own hands, so the thirsty workers who passed by his house could drink fresh, clean water in the scorching sun. I come from the hut where my mother went to school in Tororo, a tiny rural town on the border between Uganda and Kenya. I come from the urban compact neighborhood of Kampala where my father grew up, with 4 of his siblings. I come from the plane that transported them from the turmoil of East Africa to a different brand of turmoil in the United Kingdom. I come from all these places, some of which I've seen with my own eyes, and others which I've imagined 1,000 times while hearing the stories that my family had passed down through the years. They are all part of my story. Home is more than about a physical place. It's in the imagination. It moves beyond borders. But the most creative place for making home will always come from the heart. Everyone in this space, we're all in the process of creating our own narratives. Our stories aren't static. What have you learned from your family stories, and how are they changing you? And how are your stories affecting those that will come after you? Me, I listened to the stories of my family and my friends. I knew there was a bigger world out there beyond my hometown. I wanted to see it and experience it and grow from it. I've called England home, but also Scotland and Northern Ireland and North Carolina and now the hills of East Tennessee. I almost always stand out. Usually I arrive with a little in the way of possessions, but generally I leave with riches of stories, experiences and friends, and a greater sense of assurance and belief in myself. Trains, planes, buses, my Subaru Forester, these spaces of transition have become places of home for me. That sense of movement feels comfortable to me, and I find myself connected to others who have found themselves on the move. Go back to where you came from, sure, then bring it back into your new surroundings proudly. Discrimination against people is wrong, and I believe we're all in agreement with that. But discriminating between people, and that is looking at how we're all different and belong to unique stories, is crucial. It's the best way to develop a world based on mutual respect and discourse. In Sikhism, there's a philosophy, sort of like a call for duty, that you go out into the world and adopt 5 different religions or 5 different ways of life that aren't your own. You fully immerse yourself in those traditions and those communities, learn the language, the poetry, and when you're done with the 5th, your journey is complete. You feel connected to others with different beliefs. You now understand what it means to be a Sikh, to be part of the larger world. In essence, you arrive home, because your lot in life is to learn. This is the same spirit of what I try to teach now as the president of the International Storytelling Center, an arts non-profit organization based right here in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And if you remember only one thing I say today, let it be this: listening leads to understanding, understanding leads to connection, and connection leads to peace. Storytelling, regardless of the form it takes, helps fill in the completeness of who we are and what we can be. And it not only enriches lives, it can help us change the world. This nation is in the midst of an identity crisis. The painful legacies of our past, the Civil War, slavery, Jim Crow, it's always been there beneath the surface. And it may feel like it's bubbling over at the moment, but how do you see this particular moment in history? Is it horrifying, sad, dangerous in its uncertainty? Now, all those things may be true, but I also see it as an opportunity. Some of the greatest moments in human history come from a collapse or an upheaval, which often sprout movements that advance far beyond what we previously knew. In 2016, I got to listen to a talk by Dr. Bernice King, daughter of Dr. Martin Luther King, when she came to my region to give a talk. And she said something. She said something that Black Lives Matter and Donald Trump have in common. Both of them have woken this country up to the great disparities that already exist. Regardless of political beliefs, everyone I have shared this with agrees. When September the 11th happened, I was living in a commune in Edinburgh, Scotland. There were attacks on a mosque and a synagogue shortly after that in my own community. It woke me up. I finally understood the path that I wanted to take, and I began to see myself and the outlines of the story that I wanted to see in the world and how I could make it happen. Can't imagine how good that felt. I pulled out the phone book and phoned every place of worship in Edinburgh. I invited imams and priests and rabbis, everyone to come together, and 6,000 people showed up at the event, which was held at the National Museum of Scotland. Coptic Christians sang songs of resurrection in Arabic. Sikhs wore the Scottish Sikh tartan and performed traditional Bhangra with bagpipes. Jewish Scots performed music that combined Scottish Celtic and klezmer traditions. They named their band Celtica Schmeltica, which is phenomenal. In other words, each group came together in a safe environment with a feeling of unity in the air, a feeling of hope, and they told their stories. Did it end the world's problems? No. But I'm willing to bet that after that day, many of those 6,000 people saw the world differently. And they took that new empathy with them back to their congregations. Yes, we are living in difficult times. The world is divided in so many ways. The way to bridge that divide is by asking questions, talking, being willing to open ourselves up, to make ourselves vulnerable, listening, and listening in new ways. This may seem like an impossible task, but it can happen on a personal level, one connection at a time. In 2011, I moved to the United States to become a Rotary Peace Fellow at the University of North Carolina. And during my time in Chapel Hill, I spent nearly 2 years listening to people's stories at a homeless shelter, part of my own research on the aesthetics of home, the search for home through memory, through story. One man carried a love letter to a woman that he had never sent in case he met her again. Another told me that he would only fall asleep in the shelter by visualizing being somewhere else, like the Swiss Alps or farmlands that he knew from memory. I closed my eyes and I tried to make it so that it's nice, he said, like a home. I met 2 young men in a cafe one day that were living in the shelter. One came from the north and the other from the south, and they told me that they were both rejected by their families. I met sleeping under a bridge one day, and since then, they found each other and fell in love. Their home existed in the relationship to one another, and now they're on that journey together. But none of my interactions stuck with me more so than Johnny's. Johnny was an elderly man. He was white. He had a weathered face and a scraggly goatee and a deep voice. I was used to having surface level conversations with most people in Chapel Hill outside the shelter, but my conversation with Johnny went deep, fast. We talked about our personal circumstances and our struggles, the world around us. I loved our talks because they were honest cultural exchanges. But I could tell he was holding back. He always seemed to be reaching for the right words that could describe his life as a shelter resident. We began meeting regularly, sitting outside the shelter and smoking cigarettes and chatting. And one day I invited Johnny to lunch. I asked him what he considered home, and his answer surprised me. He began talking about how he'd once been a professional baker and about all the food he'd cooked for friends and family he once had, once upon a time. How he used to get up early every morning around 4 a.m. and manage 32 ovens at the same time so he could produce thousands of Southern biscuits in a single morning, usually while jamming to Eric Clapton. As he told his stories about cookies and cobblers and how he turned Oreo pies into an art form, Johnny's speech became more natural, even exuberant. Baking was something he felt proud of, and he talked about it with authority. It was almost poetic. We kept meeting and having conversations, and at one point he told me I was his only friend. Another day he said, until I get out of the shelter, I would not be comfortable, not until I can get to a place and start drawing money. To Johnny, home was not a physical place. It was a feeling of comfort he could revisit in his imagination. Where it existed on the map was not important, but I learned that its happiest memories are actually up in the Black Mountains of Northwest North Carolina. I was really good up there, he said. To him, a sense of home meant much more than having a place to sleep and eat. It meant a sense of becoming established, feeling grounded, feeling valued, belonging. On Thanksgiving Day in 2012, I went to find Johnny at the shelter. I wanted to share a Thanksgiving meal with him, but he was gone. I found out he had left the shelter and was told that he'd moved back to the Black Mountains. Now, did our conversations lead to his move? I'd like to think so. Maybe talking about it enabled him to transition from shelter life sooner rather than later, back to a place of comfort. I miss him, and I only can hope that he's now found a sense of home. Now, what lesson can we draw from this story? Dozens, really, but we'll start with these. Everyone is a storyteller. Not many people were bothering to listen to Johnny anymore, but once he began talking about the thing that he loved, he transformed into a great storyteller. His stories were a way for him to make sense of a personal challenge and battle back against the stigma of homelessness. He just needed someone's ear. Storytelling leads to understanding. Just by being there, he opened up. I understood who Johnny was in a way that his circumstances at the time couldn't possibly convey. And he opened my eyes, offering a unique way to think about notions of home and displacement and diversity. Because many of us are in our own states of homelessness, and that includes everyone in this space. We are all constantly searching for recognition or a sense of community, for belonging. We all desire to be loved, and we desire the chance to love. In other words, we are in search of a sense of home. Johnny taught me to understand the world in a new, more expanded way, that listening leads to understanding, understanding leads to connection, and connection leads to peace. Imagine if the world were filled with more interactions like these. Now, this might sound daunting, but we don't need to spend months building these connections. We start with one person, one conversation. We just need the will and the forum. My dad would always say, I don't have anything to say. I'm not a storyteller. But give him some whiskey and some masala chicken and suddenly he's Mark Twain. And once you understand your own story matters, it's not a large leap to understand that other people's matter too. I live in America and I do my job because I believe in this country has the potential to be one of the greatest peace players in the world. I have always been an outsider, an immigrant to 5 countries, and I've learned over the years to use that status as a strength. As a son of refugees, as a minority who's experienced marginalization, I used my old experience as a target of racial hatred and worked hard to break through that silence and other barriers, and I do so for others. And that's really our mission here at the International Storytelling Center, rooted in a small Appalachian town in the US South 49 years ago. We helped to professionalize storytelling and establish strategic partnerships with the US State Department, the White House, the Smithsonian Institution, the United Nations, everywhere from Silicon Valley to Pentagon to Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, helping to tell her hero's journey of coming back home. But at its roots, storytelling is a folk art. It belongs to the people, every one of us and everyone we serve, those you know personally and those you don't. So it's important to us to bring storytelling to people as a tool, not just as an evening's entertainment. We're not just talking about people sitting on porch swings and spinning yarns over lemonade, though that's part of it. Storytelling has to evolve. We work to develop festivals, community events, and podcasts, even video games, downloadable toolkits for educators. Anything that will reach people where they are and get them thinking beyond what they're told through a soundbite on the news. Sometimes we help rural hospitals and farm spaces, shops, even family laundrettes become cultural hubs for transforming these places into storytelling spaces. Not everyone's going to come to an arts center, so it's important for us to go to them. When I took the job at ISC, one of my first tasks was to go out and meet potential donors. Now here I was, the new guy in town, a brown European liberal in a white conservative region. How is this going to work? Well, one of the first people I got to meet was a Mr. Scott Niswanger. Scott is a self-made man and a highly influential philanthropist in the region. And when we met, the first thing he did was to ask me for my story. So I told him about my upbringing, my parents fleeing Uganda, a lot of what I told you. And he smiled and he told me that not many people knew this, but during that time, he was a cargo plane pilot. He delivered food and goods to the refugees fleeing the borders into Kenya. I was stunned. It's not often I get to meet someone who already knew my story and was already part of it. I got to shake the hand of a man that helped my people thousands of miles before I was even born. We were already connected, and we would never have known if not for meeting in person. Sometimes the listening leads to moments like these, moments that will occur years from now. You never know. Our stories can affect the world in years to come, even generations to come. Our paths cross over in so many unexpected ways, and if we can foster a listening culture, who knows how connected we might be. But you don't need to be an outsider or part of the ISC to change the world. You can do it by listening. When marginalized people suffer, we must hear their stories and record the tragedy and the healing. So that record will be there 10 years down the line to remind us of a place in time we don't want to go back to. Nothing is gained by pretending these histories that are not necessarily rosy or wonderful, never happened. Remember, we go to Holocaust museums to understand our mistakes of the past and learn for ourselves. We are curious beings after all, and we all have a desire to discover the truth for ourselves. A story told by a person is inherently good. It holds truth. As long as it holds truth for the teller, our role is to listen. And here in Appalachia, where we live, when someone asks, what does the Confederate flag mean to you? Everyone tenses. Any individual who dares to answer the question is opening himself or herself up for attack. But as a symbol, the flag obviously holds different meanings to different people. We in this room, in this space, are professionals. We are in positions of power. And as leaders, we must be willing to create safe spaces for people to speak. It's not only our job, it's our civic duty. And this might mean listening to stories that make us feel defensive, even angry. How far are we willing to go to listen? If we really believe in healthy discourse and dialogue, we've got to be willing to face the discomfort. We cannot be afraid. Remember that little cul-de-sac that I described to you at the beginning of this talk? I want to end with a house on another little street in another small town. It's not on the south coast of England, but rather in the mountains of East Tennessee. It's my street in Johnson City. I've got conservatives living on one side of me, liberals on the other. And in the middle is a modest house owned by a brown-skinned, beatboxing, English-born Sikh of British, Asian, Indian, and African descent, who periodically wears a kilt and plays the didgeridoo on his porch. I may as well be an alien. But we eat together, we drink together, we celebrate birthdays together. And even when we disagree, we listen to each other. I try to make my house a lot like the one that my mother made in England. In 2016, just before a Black Lives Matter rally, I hosted a dinner. 5 people attended. 2 activists organizing the rally, the town's Republican mayor, and an African-American clergyman, and me. I cooked all day, and when they arrived, I said, before we talk politics, we're going to break bread. The 5 of us ate spicy curry together, and I watched the barriers melt away. And when it came time to talk, everyone told their stories and listened with an open heart. We came to some understanding about what to do going forward, and even the Republican mayor ended up attending the Black Lives Matter rally. 2001 is complicated, but if it seems like we're getting further away from understanding those different from us, it's perhaps because as a society, we're not trying hard enough. If it isn't coming from our elected leaders, the ones that we put into office, then we need to and should lead ourselves. And we can all do that. We can go deeper than the superficial stories that we are offered on TV or online and talk to individuals about their lived experience. And we can find the spaces in cafes and porches and local events for people to tell and listen to stories inclusively. Just as there's no one story that makes up this nation, there is no one story that makes up the places that we live and work and call home. In order for this work, we've got to start thinking of ourselves as artists, all of us. And we have to see the artistry that exists in all of us. You're a storyteller. Your story is your own to tell. and it's different from anyone else's on this earth. Tell it, embrace the creative process, be willing to open yourself up to make yourself vulnerable, be honest, and let's find ways to listen to those stories that can build empathy and understanding, because America, our world, is made up of millions and millions of stories, heartbreaking, hilarious, poignant, complicated, infuriating, and fascinating narratives that go far beyond a 140-character tweet. And these are the kinds of stories that can only come from personal contact. All we've got to do is listen to them. So there's one question I want to leave you with that I hope you're going to think about more and continue to ask others. And that is, what's your story? Namaste. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kiran. That was truly, truly wonderful and inspiring. I'm sort of at a loss for words right now, listening to tell you stories. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to take a few minutes here to see if people have some questions to put into the question and answer box. I've got one already. Okay. Could you, and this is to you, Kiran, could you please give some practical tips to help facilitate intergenerational storytelling? So many of the young Asian American generation use the excuse that their parents do not want to talk about their past, whether it's a trauma of war or whatever. And then there is sometimes a linguistic barrier. So basically, do you have some tips for facilitating intergenerational storytelling?
Well, I mean, it's a whole workshop. I think it's a whole workshop, but I think really creating moments together, intergenerational moments, and kind of finding ways to kind of, I think the pandemic, and one of the things that we're doing during the pandemic, is such a beautiful time to do story collecting. And when we can encourage young people to ask questions to elders in a way, giving a chance to listen, be patient, but also listen to the elders, having a chance to listen to the full completeness of those stories. And I think sometimes creating moments, creating relevance, finding spaces that can interconnect, whether that's, I remember one project in the Forestry Commission, an intergenerational project, Bangladeshi elders and Scottish Bangladeshi kids. And they went into the forest, and that was a storytelling project. And the elders taught the young people how to make fire, and they never knew that they could make fire. And that led to a storytelling exchange. I think creating these moments when we get to kind of get that intergenerational experience, whether that's in the kitchen, in the food, in the forest, creating memories together. And then obviously there's techniques and tips where we can, go into silence our minds and let's go back to moments, pivotal moments where we start to think about the things, moments that shaped us. I like to think some of the best storytelling, I talk about front porches. There's a reason, because it's a liminal space, transition space, and neither inside nor outside. Something very creative happens in that transitional, whether it's a life transition or physical transition. But imagine the pandemic is like one great big front porch right now. We're neither inside nor outside. It's a creative space. And finding those moments in this space to find that connection. But I think one of the ways, particularly in intergenerational ways, is fostering safe way moments together where you get to go on a journey or experience something and then create a memory from it. And then the reflection that can happen, the learning that can happen to get to know one another in that sense. That I think that's one of the best ways for intergenerational work.
Thank you very much. We have another question that's come in. Do you prefer novel writing, short story writing, or screenwriting?
Not really any. Sorry, I'm not really I'm not really a writer in that sense. Preferences from different, but I think it's a good question, because what I would ask back is, what do you like out of those? Because they're all storytelling. And what are you drawn to and why? Do you like the long story? Do you like the short story? Do you like a series of stories that tell a bigger story? I look in Ken Burns movies, can be really, really long, but I love watching them because it gives me a deeper look into the life of Muhammad Ali or Vietnam or the parks. But I also just love equally some of the shorter essays that you can sometimes read. So I would ask that question back: what do you like out of those? And maybe also, are there other storytelling forms, podcasts, the Moth Radio Hour, StoryCorps? And when you listen to a story, what is it that you like about it? And from the written form or the oral tradition, do you like listening or do you like reading? Because they both are storytelling, but they can play in your mind in different ways. Often reading or listening creates the map in your mind. So I answered that. I throw that one back to you, but it's a good question.
We'll take one more question before we move on then. Someone is asking, have you done any TED Talks that they can watch?
Yeah, I did one TED Talk. I was really, really nervous, but I did it. Even storytellers get really, really nervous, and I was so nervous I almost collapsed when I came off stage. But it's called TEDx Nashville, Storytelling, A Peaceful Power. And it's available if you just Google Storytelling, A Peaceful Power, maybe my name, it will come up. TED is a good storytelling platform as well, but I always encourage, don't be scared to tell your story and don't feel like you have to be compelling. Every story is sacred. Every story matters. If it matters to you in your heart, then it matters to others, and that's what holds it sacred. Don't worry about getting on a platform or a stage. It has to be perfect. Just talk about the things that matter to you. Your home, your place, your food, your walk home from school, whatever it might be, it matters because it's your part of your story, and your story matters.
Thank you again. I really like the idea that you mentioned about the porch as a liminal space. I think I've experienced that myself in meeting neighbors. The porch seems to offer that safe space because it's neither in nor out, as you described.
It can be a classroom, when you go into a school and you come out, where a classroom is a storytelling space, playground is a storytelling space.
And in Baltimore, there's a tradition of stoop stories where, which you've probably heard of, people sitting on their front steps and talking. So there's that space as well, I think is real interesting.
I have a stoop story, but I won't tell that one because I don't think it's a safe one to tell right now.
All right, well, thank you. We'll have time at the end of the session to ask some additional questions, but we want to move on to our other guests for the evening. So thank you, and we'll be back in a little bit. Thank you. So we're now going to have an opportunity to hear from Marianne Kellum and Tuna Kellum, Estonian patriots and politicians who were involved with the Singing Revolution. They can't join us tonight, but they were kind enough to send about a 15-minute video from Estonia talking about their life story and the political and social work that they have done. So I'm going to ask Patrick to start the video for the Kellums, and then we will come back and I'll introduce Shodekeh.
Hello to everyone, and we wish we could be there in person and that we could all be together in a room and discuss things and meet, but due to wonderful modern technology, at least we can do it this way. I'm Marianne Kellum. I am a strange mixture of refugee child who grew up in America, spent most of her life in America fighting for the freedom of Estonia and all other occupied countries in Europe. And now I live in Estonia for a good 30 years. So it's something that has been part of my life from the day that I was born. My parents were Estonians, of course, and in September 1944, they left Estonia on a ship, which was one of the last ones to leave Tallinn harbor, and leaving my grandmother behind on the dock. And then they wandered through war-torn Europe, as many other refugees did, because there were thousands of them died trying to escape the Soviet invasion, and finally ended up in a displaced persons camp in Germany, where I was born. And life went on. People worked, struggled, tried to find enough food to survive, and eventually came the end of the war and the opportunity to find a new life because no one wants to stay in a refugee camp forever. I can say almost without exception, everyone who left Estonia back then as refugees left with the idea that this is a temporary escape and that we will come back to Estonia. They believed in something called the Atlantic Charter, which of course was not actually held to. It was a good theory, but it didn't work in reality. But in America, I was lucky enough to live with my parents on a farm in Ohio. Back then, refugees couldn't just walk in. We had to be screened. You had to have a job. You had to have some sort of political and health certificates. And we were on a farm in Ohio, which was ideal for me because there was a little girl there who was exactly my age. And playing with her, I learned English. So by the time I went to school, English was fine for me, and it's been my strongest weapon to fight for freedom and democracy all these years, because English is such a universal language. I encourage any of you who are doubtful about learning languages, learn languages. They are useful. They will save your life, even. I started my political activity early because I had been raised by my parents to love Estonia. And as an only child, they focused their attention on me. I spoke Estonian at home. Our dogs and cats, and eventually my children, all spoke Estonian. We, of course, all spoke English too. And anytime there was an opportunity to get out the message about this little country of Estonia that's occupied and in dire straits, being Russified and about to be wiped out culturally and politically and in every way, we would do that. We would hand out little souvenirs with Estonia on it, like my father had these wonderful little matchbooks. That when people asked him, "Oh, you have such an interesting accent, where are you from?" He would launch into a long story about Estonia, where he's from, and then hand them a little matchbox that had a map of Estonian information. So it was a never-ending battle because Estonia, being a small country, we all had to do as much as we could to keep the issue and the language alive. Our biggest and strongest partner in this effort to free the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, was the United States. And that was the ideal country for me to be living in and to be able to lobby and work and write letters and meet with senators and congressmen and organize protests in front of the Soviet embassy, to do everything possible to get attention for the issue. We worked together with all of the other captive nations. And as one of my American friends said to me, "Oh, Marianne, I'm so jealous. I wish I had some sort of ethnic background like yours, because you have so many interesting experiences and you have such a beautiful flag." So it did lead to amazing experiences where I met with several US presidents, many congressmen and senators, and convinced them that if they were already working on the issue, that this was the proper issue to work on. And if they weren't aware of Estonia and its plight, then to encourage them to learn about Estonia. The reason I mentioned the United States as our most important partner in the struggle for freedom and reestablishing independence for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania is because the United States established very early on a policy called the non-recognition policy, which meant that the occupation of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania by the Soviet Union was illegal and not recognized by democratic Western nations because they all followed America's lead. America was the one who set the tone, took the brave step, and then amazingly, for a huge country with so many other issues, maintained this policy of non-recognition for nearly half a century. That is a record, I think, in foreign policy. And it was difficult. We, as part of the refugee community, had to really lobby sometimes because there were times when the American government also wanted to engage in détente and be friendly with the Soviet Union and forget about Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, which could be a problem in relations with the Soviet Union. I wrote tons of letters to the editor, and I got to the point where they wouldn't take my letters anymore, so I had to start writing under pen names. And that was a lot of fun. My great success was once when I had 5 letters in one issue of a Washington, D.C. major newspaper. They were all by me, but all by different names. And it succeeded because you can't write too much. I think you're a nut. A defining moment for me in my life was the Hungarian Revolution, where I learned the lesson that freedom is well worth fighting for and dying for if necessary. And in our work, we were also relying on our partners in the captive nations, as I said, and one of our heroes was Václav Havel from Czechoslovakia, whose famous saying was, "For your freedom and ours." And this was echoed, as I realized later, by Nelson Mandela in South Africa, where he said, "As long as one person is not free, no one is completely free." So the story could go on. I'll let Tuna take over now. We're an interesting couple because I was the refugee and he stayed there all those years during the Soviet occupation. Please.
Yes, thank you, Marianne, and thank you for listening to us. I stayed in the Soviet-occupied Estonia, and my first experience of visiting another country was when my parents took me to Finland in summer 1939. In Finland, I had my 3rd birthday. They stayed for a couple of weeks, and I was all the time, they said, frustrated because I wanted to go back home. And when we came back, then 2 weeks later, Stalin and Hitler became friends and divided Europe between themselves. The personal impact for me of this deal was that my next trip abroad was postponed for exactly half a century. It was in 1989 when I was offered for the first time Soviet foreign passport, and I flew to Canada and to the United States to explain the Citizens Committee's movement, of which I was one of the leaders, who wanted to restore freedom and independence of Estonia on the basis of legal continuation, because the Baltic states became independent since 1918. As a result of disintegration of the Russian Empire. And they were members of the League of Nations in 1920s and 30s. Then they were occupied, and as Marianne said, our lifeline, personally lifeline, for me was the knowledge that the biggest and most powerful democracy has never recognized the occupation and annexation of the Baltic states as legal. So that was a ground for us to rise for the defense of our personal freedom and defense of a rule of law society. It was said that in the Soviet Union, it was impossible practically to have different opinions because different opinions were punished. But my personal experience is that every change in society, in the state, begins with a change in individuals. And the choice every person, even under dictatorship, can make is to whether to drift to the mainstream of propaganda and lies, or to try to abstain from it as much as possible. That was my choice. because abstaining from lies and then propaganda meant restoring your personal dignity and respect as an individual, not one of the millions whose dictators manage as they like. And so my first act was to compose a memorandum to the United Nations in 1972. There were two underground groups in Estonia which proposed this initiative. And this was a memorandum asking the United Nations to provide help to evacuate the Soviet occupation troops and to organize free elections. That was the crazy idea at that time. And speaking about these democratic alternatives which were created in Estonia, they were titled from 1988, the Singing Revolution. That is revolution not by violence, but singing national songs. And it started when people felt more free. They started together. They displayed the national colors, which were forbidden strictly during the Soviet times. And they gathered to the town hall square in Tallinn, when authorities forbid these gatherings. The thousands of people who were there marched to the song festival ground and started so-called night singing festivals there, one night after another. The new singers emerged, singing new national songs, and this united tens and thousands of people. And it showed that revolutions and change can be brought about not only by violence, not by demolishing buildings or starting conflicts in the streets, but can be brought about by peaceful cultural means. Singing revolution was our trademark, and under this trademark, as I said, the Citizens Initiative, starting registering Estonian citizens, not regarding their nationality, legal citizens, proceeded and finally achieved, against all the odds, the goal to elect a really authoritative legal national representative body, the Congress of Estonia, which was by national referendum entitled to decide about Estonia's future.
Thank you very much. Again, I wish, as Marianne and Tuna said, that they could be here to answer some questions. But I do want to mention a little bit more about the Singing Revolution. It is a film that is available for you to check out, and I'm going to put a link in the chat box for you to take a look at the trailer for the Singing Revolution, and that'll take you to some information about the film itself. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce our final speaker for the evening, Shotake Telepharo. Shodekeh is a colleague and friend here at Towson University as our innovator in residence. And he is a multidisciplinary artist, as I think he'll explain in his story that he'll be sharing with us about vocal percussion and his relationship with Alash, which is a Tuvan throat singing ensemble. So Shodekeh, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Shodekeh. I'm the current innovator in residence here at Towson University, specifically housed by the College of Fine Arts and Communication. And a great deal of my work as an innovator has built-in elements of outreach, consultation, and musical ambassadorship. So first off, I want to start with a link here that I want to drop into the space. And this link will take you to the publication of a book published by MIT Press. The title of that text is How History Gets Things Wrong, The Neuroscience of Our Addiction to Stories by Alex Rosenberg. A really fascinating text with some really intriguing concepts. And in the last sentence here within the encapsulated synopsis, I'm going to read, in fact, Rosenberg argues, we will only understand history if we don't make it into a story. Feel free to go into the link and take a look at the synopsis there. And essentially what I believe Rosenberg is trying to argue is that there are so many bits and pieces of history that go unilluminated. And so how can it ever be presented in a holistic fashion through storytelling? Because storytelling also doesn't include a variety of missing details, other perspectives, so on and so forth. It's essentially unholistic. So playing with that concept in terms of a little bit of cognitive dissonance, I want to sort of synthesize a little bit of this argument into how I want to go into a little bit of my story working with Alash as a professional beatboxer, vocal percussionist, and breath artist, and essentially illuminate how my storytelling experiences in the past, present, moving into the future, working with Alash Ensemble, allows for my storytelling and my research into Tuvan music and culture, and therefore its history as a sort of history laboratory, if you will, through musical ambassadorship and collaboration. So where do we start with that? Well, first you should know a little more about the Alash Ensemble. They are a traditional Tuvan throat singing ensemble located in Kizil, Tuva, which is a part of southern Siberia within the Russian Federation. There's a link there to the website of the Alash Ensemble. So Tuvan throat singing encompasses a reflection of the herding practices and the nomadic practices of residing within this region of Siberia, within Tuva. Now, they are anchored by the Tuvan Cultural Center, and this serves as a huge platform for not only their music, but the message of their music. The Tuvan language is essentially endangered with less than 1 million speakers left in the world. And so when Alash performs the traditions of Houma, a Tuvan variation of Overtone Singing, they are spreading advocacy and essentially as an essence of linguistic preservation, cultural preservation through musical advocacy. Now, Overtone Singing essentially exists as a vocal and musical phenomenon in which different pitches are illuminated by way of strict and very precise and exacting vocal restriction techniques. So the speaking voice that you're hearing me use now, there are different pitches, different harmonic qualities, different resonances that are going unilluminated. Tuvan throat singing allows for these different pitches to become illuminated, and so therefore, it sounds like 2 or 3 or maybe 4 pitches are being sung at the same time, where actually they're being illuminated. So I met Alash in 2011. And the first time we ever played music together was actually here at Towson University. This was when I was a musician in the dance department here at Towson. So I met them through a mutual friend, and I invited them to come up to Towson University to engage in a little musical experimentation. There's another link to Alash Ensemble and their larger network of friends and musical collaborators, of which I am one. So if you look at that link there, you'll see the top one has a video of myself working with Alash. So we met in 2011, began to explore musical possibilities together through improvisation in 2011, tube and throat singing, beatboxing, a fantastic combination. And then the following year, I was invited to go out to Tuva to work with them in Southern Siberia of the Russian Federation, specifically Kyzyl Tuva. So moving forward, and I'm going to provide a link to some of my work with Lash specifically, so that you can get a look at some of these videos and some of the documentation, video documentation of our work together over the years. So fast forward 2012, I have a chance to work with the Lash in the United States and in Tuva. And we began to essentially build enough of a rapport that we could tour together throughout the United States whenever a Lash would come here to tour, and essentially that's a huge part of how they make their living. So from 2011, 2015, we built enough of a musical connection and relationship and fantastic friendship that we recorded some material together that was independently released by the Alash Ensemble, their third studio recording. Then in around that same year in 2015, we were approached by Smithsonian Folkways with an opportunity to release the material that was recorded independently and distributed independently. I just dropped another link there in the chat space. This is the Smithsonian Folkways hyperlink to the Achai album, which was re-released in 2017 by Smithsonian Folkways. Again, this is us taking the advocacy to a whole nother level. This was the first time that traditional tube and throat singing was released by Smithsonian Folkways as a studio album, featuring myself as a special guest on the entire work with 3 songs throughout the album experience. This album was actually dedicated to the legacy of Kongaral Ondar, one of the leading advocates and globalizers of traditional tube and throat singing. Just a little context, following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, this provided an opportunity for tuba music to be globalized beyond its borders, because previously tuba music was not seen as something that could represent as a spearhead a larger ethnic quality or experience or cultural representation throughout Russia. So 1991 throughout the mid to late 90s, there was a tiny explosion of tuba music being globalized across the world, particularly here in the United States. So that allowed for me to get to know Alash Ensemble. Had it not been for the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, there's virtually no way I would have learned about tuba music, specifically Alash, and developed this really beautiful and dynamic working relationship ever since. Essentially an exchange in musical ambassadorship. So where do things go from there? I've come to the conclusion that essentially what I've been doing and working with Alash as a hip hop artist, specifically as a beatboxer, is I've been developing a very specific form of advocacy and musical ambassadorship that I refer to now as Tuvan hip hop, taking traditional tuba music, forms, varieties, and synthesizing it by interpreting these possibilities as a professional beatboxer, vocal percussionist. There's another link here in the space for you to access and look at, specifically focused on Badi Dorju Ondar. Now, Badi Dorju Ondar is one of the members of the Alash Ensemble, along with Ayan Sherzik, and Ayano Sam, along with Sean Quirk, who is the house manager, band manager of Alash, and interpreter and tour manager. So in 2018, Body Dorjuandar asks me to help him record his debut solo album. And that entailed the responsibilities of magnetizing other potential collaborators for this project. So in the link there, in the chat link there, you can access the hyperlink for the WTMD promotional page for the recording of the album of Body Dorju's debut solo album. This was recorded in 2019, pre-pandemic, and we had amazing guests on there: Easy Jackson, Wendell Patrick, Jasmine Pope, MacArthur Fellow, Joyce J. Scott, which I'm not even sure how we managed to pull that off, bringing in a Lash ensemble, specifically Bada Dorjuandar, myself, and MacArthur winner, Joyce J. Scott. It was a really wonderful evening. And it was really, really great work and a just fantastic challenge, and bringing in the artists to be a part of this enhanced exchange of musical ambassadorship. So fast forward 2020, we're in the throes of the pandemic, and we're trying to figure out how to keep the momentum of the album going moving forward, which proved really challenging, but we came up with some solutions. So through my residency here at Towson University as the innovator in residence, I was given an opportunity to, and if you go to the links there again, to the chat space, you'll access the link for the Sweaty Eyeballs Animation Festival. And I was invited to provide music, original music that could be represented in the form of animation. And I thought, okay, this is a great chance to continue the advocacy of this album through another medium. And so we partnered with Sweaty Eyeballs and the Maryland Institute College of Art. And we had the animation students at this university create an animation video for one of the songs on the album, which took the advocacy, the musical ambassadorship to a whole nother level of awareness and distribution. So why is this significant? Producing Body Dorju's first ever debut solo album. Well, this next link is one of the main reasons why this is so incredibly significant and essential moving forward. Because music is storytelling, language is storytelling, but language and music can also be used as a storytelling laboratory or an ambassadorship laboratory, a history laboratory. So in this last link here, I want to provide you with the Facebook page to the International Houma Academy. So the International Houma Academy exists as the world's first established throat singing academy dedicated to the teaching of Tuvan throat singing, Tuvan Houma. This doesn't exist anywhere in the world. This is the first time this has been established in 2020 during the pandemic. And Body Dorjuandar is appointed as the first director of the International Houma Academy, which is also anchored by the Tuvan Cultural Center and the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Tuva. I can't wait to get back to Tuva. I can't wait to save to travel over again so I can continue to build awareness from the ground in Tuva and also exchange that between the work here in the United States. It looks like we're ready to release Body Dorju's solo album, of which I am one of the co-executive producers of, early 2022. And we're hoping to synthesize this with a major event hosted by the International Houma Academy. So the album is serving as a major spearhead for the International Houma Academy and vice versa. So with that said, you may be wondering a little more about what Tuvan throat singing sounds like. So I'll give a brief demonstration of a synthesis between beatboxing and Tuvan Houma, and then I'll pass the mic back to Greg. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the links. Lots of great music and content and context and videos for you to take home with you via the hyperlinks. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thanks again.
Thanks, Shodekeh. Appreciate the comments and your expertise in sharing that with us. So I'd like to invite Kiran back into the room if he can turn his camera back on, and we'll see if we have some questions for Shodekeh and or Kiran. I have one here already for Shodekeh. Do you have a podcast? Is the question, Shodekeh? And where did the name Alash come from?
I do not have a podcast. I'm honored that you think I'd be worthy of having one. But I don't know, that's an idea. But I'm a little hesitant because I guess everybody has a podcast these days. I don't know. But you know, if you go back to, and I can actually provide this as another link, but here we go. In the About page of Alash Ensemble, it reads, the ensemble is named for the Alash River, which runs through the northwestern region of Tuva. The Alash River has also inspired a couple of Tuvan songs which carry its name. So that's the inspiration for the name of the ensemble. They're named after the Alash River. And if you go to the About page that I offered in the chat space, you'll see an image of the Alash River located in Tuva. A little more about the geography of Tuva. If you look it up in Google Maps or a world map, you'll see that the Tuvan region is just a little bit above this geographic intersecting point between Mongolia, China, Kazakhstan, and Russia. So that might give a little more of a imaginary look into where Tuva exists geographically. And in that About page, you'll see an image of Alash in the land of Tuva. It's a really gorgeous place. The only area of Tuva that's actually industrialized is Kazil, the capital, and everything else is, as you could imagine, an unindustrialized area may exist. It's just beautiful open land and enough space for herding, nomadic migrations, and so on and so forth.
Oh, thanks, Kiran. That's great. Kiran's showing on his phone where Shodekeh was just describing where it is. So thank you, up in that region.
Oh, very cool. Thank you for showing that, Kiran.
I'm Googling it.
An interesting question for you, Kiran, here. If you received $1 million, let's say a grant, $1 million grant, what would your dream project be? What would you like to do with your center if someone gave you $1 million? That was the question from one of the attendees.
I will go out and buy 10 burgers for everybody. I'll bring Shodekeh here to do. We'll make a podcast first. Shodekeh podcast. Man, $1 million, I think. Wow. I mean, my big interest is helping this country understand its story, to do justice to that. And my big heart and my passion is, I think there's so many stories that go untold about stories of the South, stories in Appalachia, Native American experiences, African American experiences, LGBTQ experiences. And I want to be able to digitize our collection that's held at the Library of Congress, which is the largest storytelling collection for the storytelling movement, and make it accessible to every classroom in America or beyond. In a way that if we could understand and appreciate each other's stories, and I could curate it, or we could curate as a team, and make it available to every classroom, then I believe we'd have less fighting and conflict if we could appreciate that your story is part of my story. You know, the Gullah stories, the Native American stories, the traditional Appalachian stories, seeing the beauty of the stories that exist in the world. And that's something that it's my dream project to do, is to digitize that collection and make it accessible. And really go deeper into the complexities of storytelling beyond entertainment, but storytelling, understanding the tapestry that we are part of and the complexity of it. And that's my dream and my hope.
I've heard people say that everyone is a chapter in someone else's story. I mean, that sense of the web, the interconnectivity of all our stories and all of us. And for me, it comes back to your line about listening leads to understanding, leads to connection, leads to peace building. I mean, I think that is the ultimate goal. And I think what Shodekeh was describing is part of that as well. I think it's really important.
Yeah, they used to say the world is like a book, and those that do not travel will only ever read the first page.
Right.
And it's this idea that, but stories help you to travel the world.
Yeah.
And it's the same with written or film, or you hear the traditions of around the world and across time.
Have you, Kiran, to you again, have you seen more stories recently that deal with the trauma of COVID? Is that something that you're hearing in terms of your storytelling, or not so much at this time?
I mean, partly because we're in it, yeah. So it's very natural to hear, what's going on right now where you turn on the radio. But I think COVID is a time to cultivate, it's also not cultivate, sorry, the wrong word, but, get to the heart. I think what's happening in the world is we're evaluating who we are as a human species, as a planet, as a humanity. And I think the deepness of what's going on right now is that we're seeing the things that matter to us, what we love, what we care about, what's the world that we're trying to create. And I think this cultivates the essence of our humanity, which is story. It's the essence of who we are. And I think I'm hearing a lot of that come to the surface. So not so much about COVID, but more stories about love and connection, the world I wish for, the way I want.
Okay.
Longing. Yeah, so a lot more of the heart stuff, which I feel is really important.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well, being respectful of everyone's time tonight, I think we have to call this an end of our first session. So thank you both. I know Betty's going to come back on and say a few words, but I would like to personally thank Kiran and Shodekeh for their time and their expertise and the sharing of their stories tonight. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being. You on mute, Betty?
It was even wonderful to hear all of us here on the panel, even connect here this evening with our stories. I found some things that are connected to immediately, like Alash. WAE, we had Alash at the very beginning when they started coming to the United States. So what a connections, many connections among each one of us. Thank you so much, Greg Fowler, for such a wonderful moderation this evening, for sharing your talents here with us, for Kiran, for inspiring us and motivating us to tell our stories, to Tuna and Marianne Kellum for being with us, even though they were in the middle of wind and we're afraid they would lose us this evening, for sharing their great story in the middle of their times in their lives, for Shodekeh for bringing us to today and sharing the stories across the world, bringing the cultures together and explaining them, and to Patrick for helping us with all the technical leadership this evening. And to you, the wonderful audience, thank you for joining us. Tell your stories and listen to others tell their stories. We invite you, your friends, your colleagues, your students, to join us for the next session, Culture and the Land. Thank you. Until next Monday, have a beautiful autumn week, and good night.
Thank you.